welcome to the Debrief. This is Carolina Journal's weekly recap of everything happening in public policy and politics. We're excited that you're with us here. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. All right, we have Super Tuesday just a few days away. A lot going on, and this is going to be the primary for North Carolina's November 2024 elections. Okay, breaking it all down for us today, we've got Deputy Editor of Carolina Journal, Jeff Moore. He's going to be filling us in. Dr. Andy Jackson of the John Locke Foundation. He's got all the data on what you can expect from these elections. And Dallas Woodhouse of American Majority North Carolina. All right, first, I want to start a little bit with some political intrigue. One of the stories that was fresh out this week, Mark Walker. He is Republican candidate in Congressional District 6. He says that a PAC group has used AI to create a deep fake account, a deep fake ad, and modified the ad to make it sound like it's him, but that it's not. Here, take a look.
Between the two of us, this race has been much harder than I expected for Congress. I am in way over my head this time, wishing I could just go back to living in Summerfield in a nice home with my family. Colonel Castelli will most likely win because he has the serious military background and leadership skills I simply don't have. Also, I have been caught in so many lies. The public now knows more about me than my own family. I hope you will forgive me for dragging you into this and we can still be friends. We'll talk next week. Okay?
All right, so, you know, this ad has been popping up everywhere. They've taken it off of their Twitter. The American Freedoms Foundation put it together in favor of one of Walker's opponents. But now they've taken it down. Jeff, what are your thoughts about this? You've been deep in those political trenches. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is something that kind of breaks a seal on a worry that we've had for a couple of years now.
Sure.
With the advent of artificial intelligence and some of these simulated videos and audio. When is it going to come to a point that you're not sure what is real and what is not real? And I think with this political ad and the charge that this is an AI deep fake and they're taking it down, may be kind of just the trickle that comes before a flood of these kind of issues going forward in campaign politics, where you're labeling. I mean, if you can catch an opponent saying something unflattering, that can usually make or break a race. If you can fake it and make it convincing enough to where people aren't sure if that's fake or not, we get into dangerous territory there. So I think this is an incredible story.
Yeah, it sounds fake, right?
Well, I mean, here's the thing: we're seeing this in campaigns all over the place,
Sure.
and it, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, negatively portraying. I mean, you could easily create an AI simulation of Ronald Reagan's voice talking positively about some candidate. I mean, I think this is going to have to be legislated, but I don't know how you do it. I mean, one of the things is, you know, about any person with a little bit of technology background sitting in their basement can do this and can find a way to get it out there and get it circulating while hiding where it's coming from. I mean, you know, I believe there is some right to some anonymous political speech, but there has to be some limit on making things up, and I think there's going to have to be some kind of legislation, state or federally. I don't know how you do it, but I think
even Attorney General Josh Stein, running for governor right now, he came out on Twitter and said that this really can't be acceptable, and it's even happening to his own opponent, Mark Robinson, who's a Republican. What do you think about the legality of this?
Yeah, there's certainly going to be some kind of legislation, an attempt to regulate this, or an attempt to use existing laws about fraud to try to put a stop to these kind of things. And it's going to be an interesting First Amendment test, because if they are using a deep fake to make an expression about something that they believe to be true, well, is that something that the government has the power to regulate or to stop? And so that's going to be a really interesting case. I definitely see a deep fake case coming to the Supreme Court in the next few years.
Sure, really interesting. All right, let's talk now about this Super Tuesday primary that's coming up. We've got some big names in town. Former President Donald Trump's going to be in Greensboro. Nikki Haley's doing a tour, doing Charlotte and Raleigh, a couple other things. What do you expect, again, from those trenches? What should we expect this weekend before Super Tuesday in North Carolina?
Yeah, this is going to be a precursor to a lot of attention paid to North Carolina voters over the course of the general election campaign after the primary is finished. And you've seen this kind of not bubbling up, but just kind of really splurging up these last few years as North Carolina has become more and more prominent on a national stage, and we see that kind of amplified with the recruitment of the NCGO chairman to the RNC, Laura Trump, a North Carolina native, working to be co-chair of the RNC. So the profile of North Carolina has just become bigger and bigger and bigger, and with that, you're going to have more and more and more visits from these candidates.
Yeah, of course. Dallas, what are you thinking? What should we expect?
Well, I mean, I think one of the reasons you're seeing Trump come here and some of the Biden officials is, they're using the primary to basically make general election appearances. Trump's going to win North Carolina. He's going to win it overwhelmingly. He'll be, Haley will perform similarly to a lot of the other Super Tuesday states. The thing really to watch about our primary is a number of congressional races that are newly drawn and Republican favoring, where the winners of these congressional races are going to Congress.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about early voting. You have been studying this a lot. What are you seeing happening? Because early voting runs through Saturday. If folks want to get out, they still have until then. Ends on the 2nd. What are you seeing so far?
Well, we're on a similar pace to we had 4 years ago as far as total number of votes.
Okay.
One of the big differences is in 20, it was mostly Democrats that were voting or people pulling Democratic ballot. This year, it's mostly Republicans. And interestingly, with the unaffiliated voters, it's a complete flip. 2/3 voted in the Democratic primary in early voting in 20, and in 24, so far at least, it's about 2/3 are voting Republican. How is that going to affect the totals? I saw a poll where Haley pulls a little bit better among unaffiliated voters, about even with Trump, but with registered Republicans, Trump is overwhelming. She's probably going to perform a little bit better than her polling numbers. That's kind of been the case where Trump has been overwhelmingly winning, but not by the margin that polling would suggest. And that's the trend that we're probably going to see in North Carolina as well.
Jeff and I have both at different times had our stints at the Republican Party, and I will tell you that this what the unaffiliates are doing in the primary can be a predictor of how well a party does in the fall. In 2008, going way back, John McCain was already kind of the nominee for Republicans. The hot race, one of the most exciting primaries North Carolina had seen probably in 30 years, was Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And overwhelmingly, the unaffiliates pulled the Democrat ballot. And not the Republican ballot in the primary. And as you know, Obama went on to win in 16. 2/3 of the pretty much Clinton had been coronated by the Democrats. The Republicans still had an active race here. 2/3 of the voters pulled. 2/3 of unaffiliated voters pulled a Republican ballot, and 75% of those voters, 75% of those unaffiliated voters that voted in the Republican primary stuck with Trump in the fall that year, irrespective of whether they had voted for him in the primary. So it's a good sign for Republicans.
Sure. Well, what about all this? We've had mass migration into North Carolina. Jeff, what are your thoughts on whether that changes the dynamics? We have a lot more unaffiliated, a lot more new folks. What do you think that means?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Distinguishing between the total turnout number and what the rate of turnout would be. I saw this question. I've kind of been in exchange on Twitter with one of the political science professors here in North Carolina about what that rate is compared to other years, considering the inflow that we've gotten, how many more registered voters we have. So is it apples to apples if we're looking at totals, being that there's 100, I'm just making up numbers now, 150,000 more registered voters in the state? I'd be curious to
what do you think?
See what Andy thinks about that.
Yeah, I mean, so far the rate's a little bit lower if you're going by percentage of turnout compared to 20. The total numbers are about the same. And part of this might be that Republicans still, by and large, compared to Democrats, like to vote on the day of the election. So our total turnout might be higher, but the proportion of that vote that is early voting might be a little bit lower if you're just looking at the rate. So this might be masking what is going to end up being a similar turnout when you count all the ballots.
Sure. This unaffiliated voter, and do you think that this is folks who are looking for a third option? We've had a ton of parties.
No.
No, you don't think
No.
so? Tell me why.
Look, we totally misunderstand unaffiliated voters in North Carolina. Almost all unaffiliated voters are just as partisan as somebody like me is who ran the Republican Party, or people who are strong Democrats. They are registering unaffiliated for the same reason people are going to non-denominational churches. Same reason people aren't signing with the JCs and the Kiwanis Club. They are disaffiliating with everything. Yes, there are some people that are unaffiliated because they don't like either party. There is some of that, but that is not the dominant reason. It's more of a cultural thing. there's probably 20% of unaffiliateds that move back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. Here, you were asking about sort of the demographics of the state. The demographics of the state have not shifted tremendously in the last 4 years. Yes, Wake County and Mecklenburg County, that are home to a lot of Democrats, are growing fast, as are Republican counties. They're actually the fastest growing counties in North Carolina are places like Brunswick, Johnston, Cabarrus, Iredell. So the equilibrium of the state is probably about the same. The question is, which is different, because it's not a demographic question, but how is the electorate changing?
Okay.
And right now, the electorate appears to be changing in some ways, and it's early, it's 1st March, favorable to Republicans, that young voters are fleeing Biden, that black males are fleeing Biden and coming to Trump. And polls right now, Trump got about 8% of the African-American vote in North Carolina in 20. Polls right now show him getting 19%. I'm skeptical he can do that.
Right.
But if he goes from 8 to 12, Democrats are toast.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they are done.
Who are the unaffiliateds polling when they get there? Because they can vote either party, right?
They can. Well, right now it's about 2/3 that are voting in the Republican primary. And to build on what Dallas was talking about, that most unaffiliated are closet partisans.
Sure.
And so they generally go one way or the other. And the interesting thing is, it's not so much that the state as a whole is changing. If you're a generic Republican running against a generic Democrat, you're starting off with about a 2 to 3% advantage in the state. So North Carolina's been a close state for a while, but we've been sorting ours out. That's that old premise about the great sort.
Sure.
So yeah, the urban counties are going more Democratic. The inner suburban counties, the so-called countrypolitan, which is an awful political science term, those counties that immediately ring around those urban counties are going more Republican. The rural counties are going a little more Republican as well. And so all of that is more of a jumbling of folks rather than a shifting of folks in their voting habits.
I do think if I were the Democrats in North Carolina and
Which would never happen.
Well, that's right. But I would be worried. I mean, granted, there are some things that are probably artificially upping the Republican numbers in the primary. Things like that. We have a bunch of competitive congressional races where a bunch of money is being spent. But the fact is, even though Trump is the divisive figure, the people who like him are a lot more enthusiastic and ready to go vote and perform than the people who kind of like, well, Biden is what we have. Ain't nobody excited about Biden. Now, a lot of people won't vote for him.
Sure.
If he's still with us, you know, I mean.
Well, what do you think about voter ID? That's something we've been talking about for, probably half a decade, more than half a decade now. Is it really going to be a big deal? Is our first big election with it?
I think it's saying something that we got to this point in the conversation, and then we just brought that up.
Oh, that's true.
Being that it's the first time that it's really been in full effect for this kind of election, and we haven't seen headlines all over the place about how
hidden videos,
election centers are just they're in disarray. No one has IDs. This is such a problem. Yeah, hidden videos and all that kind of stuff. We're not seeing any of that.
Right.
After 10 years of a drumbeat, that voter ID was just massive voter suppression tool.
Yeah.
And so I think the fact that it's a nothing burger is kind of a big story after a decade of them kind of crying wolf about this. So I don't think it's going to affect things one way or another.
Yeah.
It's another layer of protection that gives assurances to the voting body out there that there's some accountability and integrity in the voting process, and I think that's all that was requested when the voter ID was put forth. That's what they were looking for. That's what they have now, and all of the nightmare scenarios that were painted over the last several years are not going to come to fruition.
But nor should we expect it to be perfect, right? There will be some problems. I'll give you an example.
I was going to say
me.
Yep.
I had my absentee ballot by mail flagged. I submitted it, and apparently you now have to send in an ID, a photocopy of your ID, and they couldn't read it. It was not clear enough to them. Now I credit the Wake County Board of Elections. They got a hold of me and they said, if you can just send us another copy, and I emailed it to them, and it was very good. I actually am because I do a lot of work with American Majority on the mail voting. I think we in the long run are going to need to do some improvement of how we maybe let people submit IDs to vote by mail. Like right now, it has to be a physical paper copy. It seems like to me we might come up with a way where somebody can upload their ID. We might even question whether we should require an ID requirement for a mail ballot, because you don't have anybody to compare it to.
Yeah, you're not standing there.
You're not standing there in front of them.
Yeah.
It's just, but I mean, I think it provides a level of security. So, and on the other hand, as Andy and I have talked about in the past, some of the exceptions, or sort of a hardship form you have, is a little weak. Like, I mean, just like, I didn't want to do it, or I forgot it at home. Well, go back.
Right.
But we have voter ID. It is a confidence installing measure. But there will be a few cases where somebody ran into some problems, and we'll have to work through those.
Sure.
But I suspect the left will howl about it.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we were expecting there to be some problems, but
Right.
there's been fewer than we thought there would be. Whenever you roll out something new like this, most people have ID. Most people can produce ID. There are ways to get free IDs here in North Carolina. And frankly, the impediment clauses that we have make North Carolina's ID law a relatively soft law. And I've
Sure.
seen instructions on X, the webpage formerly known as Twitter,
Sure.
telling people, go in and vote. If you don't have an ID, fill out the form and you'll get your provisional ballot and it will be counted, because it requires a unanimous vote of the County Board of Elections to reject it. To reject a ballot, the provisional ballot that comes in because they don't have an ID, and they have to have some evidence that the form that they filled out was fake, was not real. They didn't have a real reason, and they're not going to have that evidence on hand.
Sure.
So as it is, we have an ID law, but if you don't have an ID, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this on air, but if you don't have an ID, you're still going to be voting.
Right. All right, there's been a lot of other changes too. Tell me a little bit about some of what the election changes that we're seeing for 2024 and what it might mean to how we get the results back in.
Well, a big one that we have now is that whereas before counties were able to count their early voting totals, they'd bring in all the early voting from the early voting locations, they'd load them in the tabulators, and then on the afternoon of election day, they would run that and they would have that all ready to go.
Sure.
So that as soon as polls closed, they would announce that. So we would have like half of our ballots would be reported
All the returns coming in.
statewide, within a few minutes of polls closing. Well, that's changed. They can't start, the counties cannot start tabulating early votes until the polls close.
Okay.
State Board of Elections says that'll take them probably about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the county.
Okay.
This is the first time going on, so it may take a little longer.
Sure.
So we might not get all of those early vote totals until maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours after polls close. Now, we're still going to go to bed knowing who won all but the most closest of elections.
Okay.
I think the bigger impact is going to be in the general election this fall, and we've got a couple of graphics for this one. The first one shows that we had Joe Biden start off with several 100,000 votes ahead, because those were disproportionately Democrats that were voting early and by mail. And then Donald Trump clawed it back, and then around about 10 o'clock, I should say, Trump pulled ahead, and then by 11, we kind of knew what the result was going to be. What I'm expecting to see, which is on the second graphic here, and that I kind of cobbled together from the first one, is that you're going to have this period for the first couple of hours where the early voting and the precinct polling, which is predominantly Republican, is coming in at the same time. And so we're probably going to start off with in the presidential race, assuming that it's still Biden and Trump, Biden will be up by maybe tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands of votes. He'll get up to that lead will grow a little bit over the next hour or two, and then Trump will start clawing it back, and we'll have that similar, what we call a red shift that we're used to. It'll just kick in later, and it's going to be smaller. And again, if Trump's going to pull ahead, it'll probably be around 10 o'clock again.
Sure. Well, that's something that, we were just talking about the last go round. I think that sudden shift really raised alarm bells for people when they saw that dramatic pull ahead for Biden. What about those mail-in ballots, changing it to the deadline to the day of the election? What's that going to do?
We don't really have that in North Carolina. We count all the mail ballots that come in up to the day before Election Day, which
Okay.
is the majority of them,
Sure.
they are still tabulated in the afternoon. So those are going to be released.
So
That's
they'll
the
be
reason.
part of it
Yeah,
already.
so that's the reason Biden's going to start off ahead.
Okay.
The big complaint has been in states like Pennsylvania, where it's taken a long time to count. And those are what blue shift states, so they actually go more Democratic because of the way they count their ballots.
Okay.
And it took a long time, and that makes folks nervous. Where you take a long time, and
Sure.
it's after midnight. In some states, it's a couple of days later, and then you see the shift in results. We're not going to see that in North Carolina.
Yeah, and I think
Okay,
what
that's good to
Donna
know.
was also referring to is it is an important, probably the most significant change, and it is being litigated, although I think it'll be successful. The Republican legislature did change the deadline to have your ballot submitted to the Board of Elections. It has to be in by sort of close of business on Election Day. It used to be Friday after the election. If the ballot had been postmarked by Election Day,
Sure.
due to some somewhat legal challenges and actually some good reporting by Andy. I think we now know that is an unworkable system due to how the unreliability of to count on accurate postmarking of the post office. Also, Republicans just made a policy shift that they thought.
Sure.
And I think you're gonna hear some howling about this because, of course, there are going to be ballots that come in late.
Right.
Post office does a pretty good job, and so it'll be our job here at the Locke Foundation to cut through that a little bit and point out that there's probably no bigger percentage of people who submitted a late ballot that wasn't counted than any time before. That people know when the deadline is, they've been educated on it, it's in the packet, and there's always a certain percentage that mail it late.
Sure.
And there always will be, no matter when the deadline is.
Right. All right. So one of the things I want to talk about is we have a full ballot this time in the general election. We're going to have a presidential, gubernatorial. Then on Tuesday we've got primaries for both the Democrats and for the Republicans, the governor's race. Democrats really, Jeff, you and I have talked about this. They didn't totally fill out all these races. They don't have as many primaries. Do you think that's going to hurt turnout for them in the primary election?
Yeah, as Dallas alluded to earlier, I think
Yeah.
the engagement question, that factor seems to be what might flip. And when we look back to 2020, the last time where it was kind of opposite with the unaffiliated
Sure.
polling more Democrat ballots, we had a higher level of engagement. Excuse me, because you had a more active kind of primary field. You had Trump as an incumbent, and you had the challengers come in. There's more engagement there. Now we have it kind of flipped, where Biden's the incumbent, and Trump is kind of in this weird spot of being a former president and running again.
Sure.
But you have much more engagement. We have all these active primaries across
Sure.
the way. The Democrats did not fill out every position. They kind of came in with some new leadership and an emphasis on making sure they had Democrats running every seat, an emphasis on the rural parts of
Right.
North Carolina. It doesn't seem like they've really met the marks there as far
Sure.
as what they would want
But
to
primaries
achieve.
are expensive, right? Democrats are able to clear the field for somebody.
Yeah, well, let me say this, and I'll credit the Democrats. The Democrats have a problem and they have an advantage. I think it is a problem for them that the likely outcome on Tuesday night is in the top 4 statewide races: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and the state Supreme Court race. That white Democrats are going to beat African American Democrats. And I think that that in a party that recently has sort of nominated Beasley and looked to embrace African American candidates, they're going to have some repair work to do. On the other hand, I think the Democrats will go in with the top 4 races with 4 very high quality candidates. Josh Stein is a high quality candidate. Let's remember that you have to go back to 1984 to see a state attorney general that ran for governor in North Carolina and lost. That was Rufus Edmonston. Since that time, Easley and Cooper. We have had 5 sitting lieutenant governors run for governor, and they are 1 for 5. Bev Perdue winning in 2008, but Jim Gardner losing in 92, Dennis Wicker losing the Democrat primary in 2000, Walter Dalton losing to Pat McCrory in 12, and Dan Forrest losing in 20. So the Democrats have some real things going for them on the statewide races. And so what I think is going to be really important is how strong is Biden? How strong is Trump? I personally think that it's a very difficult path. If Trump were to win the state by 2 points, based on the number of ticket splitters we've had in the past, I think it's a hard road for Robinson.
All right.
Trump wins by 5, I think it's a very difficult road for Stein.
Very interesting. All right, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's about what I'm expecting as
Sure.
well. It's going to be interesting because the party the Democratic Party didn't come out and endorse any of these candidates, but you
Sure.
kind of got the feeling that Josh Stein was the party's choice, that Jim Hunt's daughter, Rachel, was the party's choice, and so on down the line. So it's not just that these are white Democrats getting elected, these are white Democrats that, at least unofficially, are kind of the party's choice to fill these seats. And I think that's what makes it a little bit harder
Sure.
for African Americans to understand. Now,
And part of it is those are good candidates.
yeah, they are
Sure.
solid.
I
They
mean,
are
you know,
solid,
and
and I mean, some of the candidates they're facing at least are also pretty good quality candidates.
That's
They just
true.
haven't gotten any traction.
Right.
I'm
Right.
thinking especially Justice Mike Morgan,
Right.
running for governor. He just hasn't. I mean, you know, when I was looking at this a few months ago, I thought, oh, this might be an interesting race. It really hasn't turned out to be,
Right.
at least so far. Now, can Robinson take advantage of this as kind of the most high-profile African-American candidate of either party? Hard to say because black voters have been very loyal, by and large, to the Democratic Party. That's been something that's been hard for the Republican Party to shake. If you're a Republican candidate and you get 10% of
Right.
the black vote, you're feeling pretty good
Sure.
about yourself. So can he kind of get that up, take that up to 15%? It's going to be hard to say. I kind of doubt it.
Well, I mean,
Right.
if he got it to 15%, he'd win North Carolina in a landslide.
Right.
Yeah, oh yeah,
right.
yeah.
But
Run through
Can he
some
do
of our
it?
congressional races
yeah,
for us, if you would.
real
Yeah.
quick. So all of the Republican current incumbents are going to win. That's
Okay.
Virginia Foxx, Richard Hudson, David Rouser, Murphy. I think that the most important congressional race for Republicans is in the 1st Congressional District, the lone swing district. And it looks like to me that Lori Buckout, who is a first-time candidate,
Really?
has a military background. I think she is seized ahead. I think the district has previously nominated Sandy Smith twice. She's been unable to win in the fall, albeit with a district that was slightly more favorable to Democrats. But the Buckout team has run a really good race. She's a quality candidate, and I think that district's going to pick a different nominee this time. And of course, that's not going to go to runoff. It's just 2 people.
Sure.
Tim Moore running in the 14th has virtually no competition in the primary of the general. He's going to Congress. In the 10th, the race to replace retiring Patrick McHenry, that's come down to Pat Harrigan and State Representative Gray Mills. And Gray Mills has the advantage there because he's been in the district longer. I think the 6th, the 8th, and the 13th, which are cover the 3 largest
Sure.
metro areas, the Charlotte, Greensboro, and Raleigh areas, all have large and unwieldy races.
Okay.
And they could go to runoffs. They could
Sure.
develop winners. But the one thing about those is, the Republicans are going to nominate whoever goes to Congress. Those are deep ruby red Republican seats, and none of the candidates are particularly problematic. I mean, the Republicans are going to, one way or another, come up with an acceptable person to go to Congress.
Sure. Tell me what it requires to get to a runoff, and if you anticipate any runoffs in some of these, either council of state or congressional races.
Well, you need to, in order to avoid a runoff, you need to
Okay.
get at least 30%.
Okay.
Plus one.
Yeah. And so, probably some of these congressional races, certainly, I'm almost certain that the 13th is going to go to a runoff.
Okay.
On the Republican side, as long as I get the numbers right, that's the
Lieutenant
seat.
governor's race almost certainly will
Probably,
go to runoff.
Okay.
probably, yeah. On the Democratic side, they seem to be lining up a little
Sure.
more, and so it looks like I can't think of any major races where the Democrats
Okay.
are likely to have a runoff.
8th congressional could go to a runoff.
Yeah.
6th could, although I'm less convinced of that.
Yeah.
There may be a couple of legislative.
Sure. Jeff, which ones are you watching?
Well, I live in the 13th, so that
Sure.
scrum is something that I'm interested in just because I'm inundated with all of the ads there.
Getting the whole flyers.
I'd be interested to see if that goes to a runoff or not. But just the dynamic between a large competitive primary, and on the Democrat side where a lot of these primary fields are cleared.
Right.
The interplay between the advantage of having kind of a top-down, longer runway for a general election, like for Stein, who's pretty much running in a general election this whole time, versus the engagement advantages that we see when you have an active primary. I wonder how those things may offset.
Right.
But then you don't necessarily have that same dichotomy in the gubernatorial race per se. If you're looking at the general and it's Stein and Robinson, it's not, while Stein has had a path cleared and Robinson has more competition, it's not as if it's like a real toss-up on the Republican side. Robinson has been a presumed nominee for a while, so I'd be interested to see how that plays out. But yeah, I'm just, and I don't know if there's going to be an answer to this or not. It's maybe intangible, but how much does the longer runway of a general election campaign.
Saves money, I would think.
Yeah, it saves money. There's focus. You get the Democrats, the people in your base are going to know who you are. But if you're not engaged as much because there's not as much competition, it's not in the news as much.
Sure.
Does that filter through? Is that a weakness in the general election where you have all those people that are engaged in the primary and then 75% of them may follow through and vote in the general?
I was interviewed twice this week about the North Carolina governor's race, anticipating it being a Stein-Robinson race, and about what issues may pop up, and of course abortion and education and taxation. But this is a hard thing for people like us to accept. But you may see, a situation where in so many of these things, the candidates themselves are not all that particularly relevant. That it is the structure of the race. There was a poll released the day that we were taping this that had Trump winning North Carolina by 9 points. Realized that would be triple his highest performance ever in North Carolina, which was 3.6 in 2016. The Real Clear Politics average has it at right now of recent Biden-Trump polling at 6 points. It's been a year since Biden led a poll in North Carolina. I got to tell you, if Trump were to win, if Biden is in bad shape and Trump were to win North Carolina by that Real Clear Politics average of 6 points, Democrats will get shellacked up and down the ballot. There aren't 9% of people who are going to vote for Donald Trump and Josh Stein.
Right.
There might be 5, there might be 4, but there ain't 9.
Very interesting.
So
yeah. All right, we're going to be watching this really closely. Thanks so much for joining us. Stick around. Make sure you go to carolinajournal.com, and we'll find lots more analysis and news that we're reporting every week at Carolina Journal. Thanks so much.